Hey everyone, welcome to Product Wise. In today's video, we're going to look at Figma. This video, I'm just going to show you some of these 101 concepts about Figma. We're going to just explore and see how to navigate around this tool and sort of learn how to use the basic functionalities. This is not going to be a sort of UX concepts video where you learn why we are designing it in a certain way, but rather to sort of push you to get started, playing with this tool. And once we do that, I will have a lot of other videos on my channel where you can go and really start using Figma and sort of connect it to different UX concepts and sort of start thinking about how do we design it and why do we design it. So in today's video, before I sort of start into the basic tutorial and sort of show you how basically we can navigate through this application and how do we sort of leverage it for different purposes, I want to start by sort of looking back and sort of see how Figma even started. Going back to 2013, think about that time. We had these new websites, we had iPhones really coming up. It was the first time when we started to have these really high resolution screens, right, at the turn of the decade. And so the most common tools that designers at that time used were Photoshop and Illustrator. Photoshop was really good if you wanted to design something just by moving pixels, so like really detailed stuff. Whereas Illustrator was really flexible and you could do a lot of things with like shapes and colors and things like that. So really a tool for illustrations. But when it came to higher resolution screens on iPhones and different even desktop computers, it changed, right? You didn't really want to deal with every single pixel, but you really wanted to see a big picture of like what the product could be and then really start experimenting with it, brainstorming with it, and really make it detail at an endpoint. So in order for that, we needed different tools. Photoshop and Illustrator were really kind of an overkill. So those were not really, that useful for product work or UX work. So they didn't have a good solution there. We had other problems, in fact, with Photoshop and Illustrator because they, in fact, cost you like hundreds of dollars a month, which was really, really difficult for someone to get started in the field. So one of the first tools that came into the industry, and I'm not sure like when it decided to be a UX focused tool, but really one tool that was very much UX focused, very much product design focused, was Sketch that came into the industry. So with Sketch, you had this very amazing balance where you had all of these tools which were very simple, where you could make these shapes, do and make sort of design these applications and websites right on the screen. But you don't have to go into the details all the time. You don't have to make every pixel perfect. You can look at it at a very high level, and then if you want, you could go into sort of the low level detail screens. So that created a really good balance. But with Sketch, there are some problems there as well. It was not that accessible. People who had a Windows PC, they did not have access to Sketch because Sketch was only for Mac users. And even Sketch was actually $100. During that time is when Figma also started. Figma was basically founded in 2012, and after about 4 years of being founded in 2016, they finally decided to launch the application, right? And, I just want to highlight that the team really took this decision that for 4 years, we're going to just work on making this product really good, make sure that it really solves a pain point, and then we're going to launch it into the market. So, it's definitely something to applaud. Now, coming to 2016, when they launched this product, this was not just an app. It was a web application. So it could literally run on your web browser. And this was not a very common thing during that time. I would say there were definitely some popular websites using web applications. But for a design tool, something that you would use to sort of really create designs, detailed designs eventually, it was not very common to have it just available on your browser. So having that available on browser made it really accessible for all kinds of users, whether you were a Mac user, a Windows user, you could just have Figma on your web browser. The second thing was it cost absolutely nothing. When Figma was launched, I believe it was completely free for everyone. So it really helped in sort of people going in and checking it out. And then the whole thing really made it very easy for people to start adopting. So Figma has from then onwards done a lot of stuff. If you look at more of the modern history of Figma, just like the last 2-3 years, they have done a lot of different things. They have done design systems now. They have done new whiteboarding tools within the Figma application. So they're really sort of taking over sort of a lot of different things that you had to depend on Adobe and all the other different tools. You had to pay so much money. Now Figma provides a lot of flexibility and ability to do within their own application. That's really great. And something interesting about this application is that this is not just being used by designers or researchers today. It's being used by teachers. It's being used by students. It's being used by all kinds of people, sort of do all kinds of things. In fact, there's so many people, including myself, who, if I want to create presentation slides, I wouldn't go to Microsoft PowerPoint or I wouldn't go to Google Slides. I would rather come to Figma because I know it's that easy. And it's not just that it's easy, but it's also very customizable. So it's very useful tool if you want to personalize what you're designing. So that's the great benefit of having a tool like Figma. Now I've talked a lot. Now let's really go into Figma's sort of application here and see sort of the basics, sort of how do you navigate this application? What are some of the basic tools, how to use it, so that, you don't really always need to watch tutorials for this tool. You can even just get started by yourself. So let's look at some of those things. So to start here, what you see on my screen is the Figma website. All you need to do here is you can go and get started for free, create an account, log in. And once you're done, you can either use the application on your browser itself. Like I said, it's a web browser-based tool originally. And then Figma also has a native application for Windows and Mac. So you can download that app as well, which is, again, I think the most common way most designers use it. So now I'll just go in and open up the Figma tool on my desktop. All right. So once you have logged in and created an account on Figma, this is what your application will look like. You will have this sort of home screen. And in this home screen, you can see we are currently, if you see the navigation on the left, sorry about that. If you see on the left, we have this navigation where you're seeing the different themes. And currently we're on this Recents tab. In the Recents tab, you see all the files that you had opened or recently used. And then on the left side, the way Figma is really organized, and this part is really important because I think this is something that kind of derives from Figma's business sort of mindset as to how do they sort of monetize the whole platform. The way they've organized this is basically different teams. So you must have a team, and you can actually go here and create new teams if you like, but by default, you will definitely have at least one team. So the name of my account is Product Wise. So you'll see by default, I have a team that's called Product Wise. Now within the team, you have this space called Drafts. So basically in this space, you can go in and you can basically create a new design file, or you can create a Figma board. And we can get into Figma boards later on in another video. That's not that important for now. But this is really a place where you go and create a design file, do something, and not really think about, giving it more structure or finalizing that file. So this is where you should really be starting on. Go and create a design file within your team. The other thing on this navigation is all projects within your team. So this is the place where you start organizing. So what you can do here, you can go in and you can start creating different projects. So right now, as you can see, I have something called a team project by default. And within each project, I have different files that I can store, right? So if I want to create a file and want to store here, I can do that. I can directly create a design file within a project itself. And again, like the number of files you can create, the number of projects you can create, it really depends on which plan you are in. But something good to know, if you're a student or if you're an educator, you can get all of these features for free. So you just need to go to Figma's education website, and over there you can just sign up, verify your account for education, and you can get a lot of these content for free, right? So that's a little bit about organization on Figma. Now let's go in and let's maybe start by creating a new design file, and we'll see how to sort of, work with that file. So in order to create a design file, the most common thing is basically coming in here and start a file. Generally, the good idea, the way you should be doing it is basically going into your specific design team and creating that file, because then it helps you stay a little bit organized. So let me go into Product Wise's team and create this new file. So it takes just a few seconds to load up this file. And as you can see, this is really a black screen. We'll start by giving this file a name. I'll just call it file name. And let's see what we have here. We have a lot of different components. It's not very complicated. It's pretty simple. There are very few basic tools, but you have no idea how powerful these tools are. So on the top left over here, what you see is basically the cursor tool. And for this moment, you don't really need to know much more about this tool other than that it is a cursor. Now, this second tool that you look at here, it's called region tools, and the most common one is basically the frame. So if you click it, what happens is you're basically able to create frames. So what are frames? Frames are basically what you can think about as the foundation for any design that you're creating. So it's often, let's say if you're creating a design for a phone, it's the frame is representing your phone's screen. If you're designing for a website, your frame is going to represent your sort of laptops or if your monitors sort of area, right? So once I clicked on sort of the frame icon here, what you can see on the right hand side here, it gives me a bunch of options for preset values as to how big the frame should be, right? Now I don't have to select from any of these things. I can basically come in here, I can sort of click and drag and create a frame of whatever size I like, right? So for instance, I created this frame, and whatever frame you've created on the right hand side, you can see after you've left sort of the frame, you can see sort of what is the width, which is represented by W, and the height, which is represented by H. So it is a random width and height, right? And you can basically go in and start designing right over this frame. This is your foundation, right, for doing any design. But one important thing to understand is that no matter what size you take, you definitely need to make sure that you have to have the right dimensions when you're designing for an application or when you're designing for a website, right? A desktop website, because these days we have so many different kinds of screens, different sizes. Every time a new company comes with a new model, we have a different size screen. And so it's really important to sort of know those exact sort of dimensions in order for you to make sure that your designs are really correct. That's why what we need to do is we go to frames and we can see all of these presets right on the right hand side here, and maybe you can choose one of these. And we just don't have not just for phone but also for like tablets. You can look at them for desktops, you can look for presentations, a lot of other purposes, even for like paper sizes, watch sizes, right? So whatever you want to design for, you can design for here, and you have these few presets right out here. So let's maybe start by putting in one of the presets here. Maybe I'll take an iPhone 14 or 15 Pro. As soon as I click on it, frame appears here, right in the middle of the screen, right? So great. We'll talk about frames in a little while. Just one more thing, I guess, before we move on is if you want to rename a frame, you can basically double click on the name and you can basically rename it. I'm going to call it home, right? Or I can even call it just a phone, right? So you just double click and you write the name, and it's writing the name of this frame here. Okay. So that basically helps you organize it. What you may have noticed on the left hand side, as soon as I created this frame, under the layer section came this sort of new layer called phone with this sort of frame icon here, right? So this left side panel is the layers panel. That's where it will show you all the layers. Now, when I said foundation, right? So anything that you make on the frame is basically embedded inside this layer. Right now, I'll show you what that means in just a second. So if you see, let's move on. Let's see what these shapes are, right? So we have different kinds of shapes and different kinds of tools here as well. So we have rectangle, line, arrow, ellipse, polygon, star, and even an image. And so all of these, ideally, these shapes are what you want to create on top of your frame, right? Because everything that's on your frame is basically representing that it's on your phone, right? Or it's on your desktop if that's what you're creating for it. So maybe, let's say I want to create a rectangle. I take this rectangle. Now, of course, I can design this outside of my frame. No one's stopping me from doing that, right? I just click and drag it and I can make any shape. And similar to sort of how the frame was showing on the right hand panel here, you can see the width and height of it represented by W and H respectively. But ideally, you would want it within the frame because you want to see how it looks within your phone screen, right? So basically what you could do with this shape is basically you can come in and take this into it, right? And you can see as I bring it in, it's now on top of the foundation layer, the frame. And on the left hand side, as I said, the shape that I drew, it's now embedded inside the frame. That's how you know that any element that you're drawing here is basically inside your foundation layer, your artwork, sort of frame that you want it to be inside. Um, yeah, by mistake, I just called it artboard because we also have different applications where frames are actually referred to as artboard. So if you're using something like Adobe XD, before we call frames as artboards there, not as frames, right? But those are basically the same concepts. So now we have this shape here. We have other tools here like a line, like an arrow, like an ellipse, right? So let's see how to do an ellipse. You just bring it in and you start clicking and dragging it, right? So it will start from the left hand top of the ellipse, and you can basically draw any shape of an ellipse. You can do an oval, you can do a circle, whatever shape you like. I might wonder, like, how do I do like a, very regular shape? That is maybe just a square, maybe just a circle. This looks like a circle, but if you look at the dimension, it's not really a circle. It's different weight and different height, right? So what I can do here is basically when I start dragging the ellipse, I can hit shift on my keyboard. And when I'm dragging it, if I hit shift, it's going to always keep the dimensions the same for the width and the height. So that's what helps me make a circle really easily. Same applies to the rectangles that I was creating. If I want to create a square, as I'm making it, what I can do is I can hit shift and it'll always make me a square, right? So this is something basic that any designer knows, and this is often common across all of the different design applications. But this is something that you must know if you're just getting started with prototyping. So these are just some common tools that I wanted to show you. We also have the pen tool, which is a little bit, just a slightly, little bit complex, but it's a fairly easy tool, but I'll keep it out of scope for this video, just so, we don't cover too much at once. Now, let's go and look at the T tool here, which is basically text. It's a very simple tool, nothing to explain here. It's just select it and you start typing text. And as you can see on the right hand side here, you can see basically all the text information here, including what typeface we're using. For instance, we're using the Inter typeface. We can use Helvetica if you like, right here. So we can type in any text, and we have sort of what weight we are using for that typeface. We have the sizes. We have different settings here as well, which you can play with. So it's very basic. It's a very basic tool for text. Again, as you saw, like I created it on top of my foundation layer, which is the frame. And on the left hand side, you can see the layer, the sort of text is within the phone frame, right? And that's what you want ideally. Now the other tools here, which are very common, if you click on this is basically resources where you can find different plugins, widgets, which I'm going to cover in a different video, not here, but this is a very interesting and very useful place, really. The other sections is basically a hand. The hand is a very interesting one, is basically because this one will help you move the canvas around, right? So if I hit click and move it around, you can see what's happening. It's really moving the whole canvas, right? It will not move your artwork or artwork or sort of the frame here, right? So even if I put it on top of my frame and I try to move it, it's not moving the frame, but it's really moving the whole canvas around, as you can see. So talking about the canvas, you can really zoom out and can see it's a fairly infinite canvas here, right? But it's not unlimited. Beware, it's not really unlimited. I have definitely seen limits of this canvas here, but you can really do a lot of things within this huge canvas, right? So that's what the hand tool helps you with, just moving the whole canvas around. But it's a very rare tool that you will use. It's not a very common, and you mostly be using this cursor tool here, because you really need to be selecting different things as you're designing. You can basically pinch in and pinch out to sort of zoom in and out within the canvas to sort of look at things in detail. And as you sort of zoom in, you can see there's grid lines here, right? And that's another interesting thing. A lot of people probably won't consider things like a basic thing, but I'll still sort of show you in this video. Is basically fun feature on Figma is basically you have these rulers, and you can literally bring in guides out of those rulers. Now, if you don't know what guides, you can just think of them as guidelines for arranging things, right? So let's say I have this text here. Maybe let's say I'm writing in Google here, right? And I'm going to change the text size to, let's say, 60, or random size at all, right? And I have, let's say, another text here, right? Which I'm calling it, let's say, Figma. And if you're wondering how I quickly made sort of a duplicate here of the text, all you need to do is select any text and you hit Control D. On PCs, if you're on a Mac, you do Command D, right? And you get a duplicate generated. And you can see as I'm doing these duplicates on the left hand side, different sort of text layers are coming up, right? And these really are layers. These really are layers. If you keep things on top of each other, you would really understand that Figma layer is really on top. The Figma text is really on top of the Google layer here. So if you just go over it and try clicking it, you're really selecting the Figma one, not selecting the Google one, because the Google one is just behind it. You really have to hit the sides and click the Google one here, right? So these layers are actual layers, right? So if you place them on top of each other, they really act as layers. So let's say I have these three things. Back to what I was talking about, the guides here. And let's say I want to align these things, right? I want to keep Google here. I want to make sure the other two things are really aligned here. Now, on Figma, a very easy thing is something called snap effect. Basically, you select any other text. If you go, you'll see different lines come up. You'll try to snap it, right? So if you're bringing Google, you can see it's snapping here, right? So it makes it really easy to move things around. If I bring in Figma, it won't snap exactly, but I can maybe snap on the left hand side like this, right? I'm snapping on the left hand side, so I know that they're all aligned, right? So that's a snap effect. But many times you're not just dealing with text, you're often dealing with different shapes, all kinds of things, right? So let's say I have this shape. This will also sort of snap, but eventually when you have like 100 different things out there and you really want to design fast, you can't just always depend on snap. So that's why, as a basic thing, when you're really setting up a design file, we often use guides. So the way guides work is basically you go and hover over this ruler, right? And you can see this arrow that's sort of the double-headed arrow. You can literally click and drag a guide out of it, right? And if as you're hovering over sort of the canvas, you can see it's showing sort of negative values, but you bring it over your frame, your foundation, and you can see that now it's showing a positive value, right? And it's showing the distance in pixels from the edge of your frame, right? So if this is the guide here, you can see the distance of pixels being shown on the sort of ruler above, right? So that's the use of a guide. And what you can do is basically you come in and you align things with the guide, right? If you're ever confused, you just align things with the guide, just like this, right? You just align things with the guide. And if things are aligned with the guide, things are just aligned, right? You don't have to worry about anything. So this is basically the use of a guide, and you can also use guides from the top and things like that. And I can go again in deeper into guides and grid lines in a different video, but I just want to give you sort of that basic understanding of all the tools that are available on Figma. Now we've understood that. That's great. What are some other tools that you should know about? I think as we were talking about canvas, let's also talk about this background color. It's black. It's very weird. I want to change this black color. If you're not selecting any element, if you're not selecting any frame or shape or in text, and if you're just on the canvas, on the right panel, you can see there is an option to change the color for your whole canvas. Just this amazing thing. You just go there. You can choose any color you like, right? You can literally choose any color for a canvas, which makes it easier for different people to design. So you can really, really design it as you like. So this is the fun thing about Figma. It gives you a lot of flexibility here, right? So that's most of the basic tools here. There's a lot of other tools like auto layout, styling, components that we can cover in a lot of detail. Those are more sort of advanced tools. But these tools, frames, shapes, text, understanding sort of how the guides work and things like that, that's really, really important. And once you have this understanding, you really don't need to get into a bigger tutorial after this. You can literally go in, start playing, and put things together on Figma. And that's why I wanted to show you this, right? Now, before I close out this video, I do want to show you one more thing, which a lot of people might think, again, is not a basic thing about Figma, but I really do think it's a basic thing. So I'm going to show it to you, right? And that's about the region tools. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just expand this frame that I have. I'm not going to keep it at the font size, just so I have more space. So I can just drag it out here like this, and I have the frame changed. Of course, this is no more the size or the dimensions of a phone, but now I just have a bigger space because I just want to show you something else. So let's say you have two different shapes. Let's have this rectangle here, and let's have an ellipse, maybe a circle, right? You have these two shapes. And there's this amazing tool, and you don't ever really need, I have nothing on top of my mind as to like when you would need it, but trust me, you need it all the time, really. So let's say you have these two shapes, and I'm going to change the color of this ellipse here. Go here on fill on the right hand side. I'm going to just change the color. And I'm going to see what you can do to sort of use these two shapes to make different kinds of shapes, right? So we have basically four different region tools here, as we call them. So if that's only visible when you select two shapes together, I think it's visible when you do select one shape as well, but not really. You have to select two shapes and you can see the region tools here. What you can do here, you see we have four options: union selection, subtract selection, intersect selection, and exclude selection. So what does these four things mean? If you look at these icons on the left hand side here, it's pretty easy to understand, but I've seen a lot of times people get confused. And when I started, I was really confused. It's like, which one should I use and how should I layer these different things so that it really works the way I want them to work and I really get the shape that I want, right? So in order to understand this, let's try this out right now quickly. So basically, the first one that we have is a union. So what union does is it basically will not subtract anything. Union is basically it will add any shape that you give it, and it will just add and make it into one shape. So if I do union, you see, it made into one shape, right? So it basically combined. So we had a circle on top of the rectangle here, and basically combined the circle with the rectangle into one shape. Now, because the rectangle was the larger shape here, and because the circle was completely inside the rectangle, that's why after it was combined, you could only see the rectangle, because the circle was completely engulfed into that shape, right? So if you go into the shape and you double click, you can still see that circle, right? That's the amazing thing. And you can actually pull the circle out, right? You pull this, you can see that it's still just one shape here. It's still just one shape. You can see on the left hand side on the layers, it's called union, right? It's one shape that you can work with, but it's just one shape, right? And now you've created this whole new shape, right? And you can literally go in and change the color of the shape into something completely different. That's the amazing thing. It makes it really simple for you to create different kinds of shapes. That's the first kind, right? I'm going to undo and go back to the initial position we were. So I'm going to do Control Z on my PC, or if you can do Command Z on your Mac, and we'll just go back a few undos here, and we have gone back, right? So we have those two shapes back. Now let's try the second one, which is basically subtract. This one basically subtract the upper shape from the lower shape, right? So basically what you see on the left hand side layer is basically you're seeing the ellipse is above the rectangle. So what it will do is it will subtract the ellipse from the rectangle, right? So it'll basically create a hole on the rectangle. So if I do subtract, this is what happens, right? Amazing, right? Exactly what we expected. The shape on top was subtracted from the shape on bottom. You basically have the shape, and again, you can change the color to whatever you like, right? And you have a whole new shape here, right? This is a really fun tool. Now, back to the original shapes we had. And now the next tool we have is basically intersect. What intersect does, it basically takes up the common space, right? It will only keep common space. So out of these two shapes that you see, what is the common space here? If I keep the circle over the rectangle, what is the common space? The common space is this circle. So if I select these and if I do intersect, all I have is a circle, right? Very easy. Just the opposite here is the exclude. The exclude basically excludes the common part. It will keep all of the shape that is not common. So if I do exclude, whoa, I get this, right? Now this is where people get a little confused. It's like, hey, I didn't exclude. I got a very similar shape to when I did subtract, right? I got a hole within a rectangle, and if I did the exclude, I also got a hole within a rectangle. This is what really confuses people. It's like, hey, if I want to make a hole within a rectangle, which option do I use? But that's the interesting thing. That's what really confuses people, and that's where it becomes more complicated. But you really have to understand that this is not that complicated. This is really easy. These are 4 tools, and I really, really recommend that you pay attention to these icons. These are really nice icons. These really explain you what is going to happen, and you can really do it. And you might not understand the importance of layers just yet. And, most people will tell you maybe the importance of layers is just naming or how you organize things. But it really matters when you're doing things like these, when you're trying to exclude something out of another shape, things like that. So that covers all that I wanted to cover sort of in this video here. And I really wanted to show you all of these tools because now you're really empowered to go onto Figma yourself and start playing with it. Do whatever you want, right? And we can look at some of the other videos here on my channel so that we really understand how we are applying different UX concepts into prototyping, right? How we think about design. Why do we color something away? Why do we choose a specific typeface? And how do we place components in different ways? So we're going to look at them in different videos in my channel. But I hope this video has been useful for you to sort of basically understand those basic elements on Figma. You can now easily navigate on Figma, right? So I hope this has been great starting point for all of you. I hope you go and spend time on Figma, play with it, really enjoy it. This is really, really fun tool, and really it's not that hard. This is really all the basic tools that you're going to be using all the time. There's not a lot of other tools that you need to start design. It's so amazing, right? So if you like this video, please click like on YouTube or, subscribe as well. But yeah, thank you for watching the video. See you again in the future.